Has anybody here seen Kelly? K-E-double-L-Y. Has anybody here seen Kelly? Have you seen him smile? Sure, his hair is red, his eyes are blue, and he's Irish through and through. Has anybody here seen Kelly? Kelly from the Emerald Isle.
Michael Kelly with his sweetheart came from County Cork, and bent upon a holiday they landed in New York. They strolled around to see the sights, alas it's sad to say, poor Kelly lost his little girl upon the Great White Way. She walked uptown from Herald Square to 42nd Street. The traffic stopped as she cried to the copper on the beat.
Has anybody here seen Kelly? K-E-double-L-Y. Has anybody here seen Kelly? Have you seen him smile? Sure, his hair is red, his eyes are blue, and he's Irish through and through. Has anybody here seen Kelly? Kelly from the Emerald Isle.
Over on Fifth Avenue, a band began to play. 10,000 men were marching, for it was St. Patrick's Day. The wearing of the green rang out upon the morning air. 'Twas Kelly's favorite song, so Mary said, I'll find him there. She climbed up on the grandstand in the hopes her might she'd see 500 Kellys left the ranks in answer to her plea. Has anybody here seen Kelly?
Join in if you want. K-E-double-L-Y. Anybody
Here seen
Kelly? Have you seen him smile? Sure, his hair is red, his eyes are blue, and he's Irish through and through. Has anybody here seen Kelly? Kelly from the Emerald Isle.
Well, good evening, and welcome to the 110th anniversary of Bloomsday, and to the 5th annual Bloomsday at the Hammer. Thanks to you for coming tonight. I'm Stanley Breitbard, and I organized this event. We got a great audience here tonight, guys. This is good. This year, rather than focusing on a single episode of Ulysses, we will have readings from 6 episodes. Along with the readings, you'll hear some songs, you've already heard one, that Joyce loved to sing, and in some cases incorporated into his writing. I'd like to introduce our performers. I'm going to start on your far left, Jane Bacon, who you just heard. James Gallo. James Lancaster. Bairbre Dowling. Johnny O'Callahan. John Lee. Robert MacNeil. Daniel Armstrong. And finally, our music director, Douglas Sumi. So we begin with a portion of the Hades episode in which Leopold Bloom and others attend the funeral of Paddy Dignam, an ordinary citizen of Dublin who apparently died of too much drink. The horse-drawn carriages begin at the deceased's home on Dublin's south side and end at the cemetery on the north side. On the way, we learn much about Leopold Bloom and his family. The carriage passes Blazes Boylan at the Red Bank Oyster House. Boylan has a 4 p.m. appointment with Molly Bloom to go over the music for an upcoming concert. About 16 hours later, over 500 pages of the book, Molly guesses that Boylan ate a few dozen oysters before their afternoon tryst. Finally, we see one of Joyce's many enigmas that he tossed into Ulysses. Who is Mackintosh? Hines, a stringer for the evening paper, is gathering the names of those in attendance at the funeral so they can be printed in the evening paper. This is a chance for Joycean mischief. Watch for this at the end of the excerpt.
Martin Cunningham first poked his silk-hatted head into the creaking carriage and, entering deftly, seated himself. Mr. Power stepped in after him, curving his height with care.
Come on, Simon.
After you, Mr. Bloom said.
Mr. Dedalus covered himself quickly and got in, saying,
Yes.
Are we all here now? Martin Cunningham asked. Come along, Bloom.
Mr. Bloom entered and sat in the vacant place. He pulled the door to after him and slammed it twice till it shut tight. He passed an arm through the arm strap and looked seriously from the open carriage window at the lowered blinds of the avenue. One dragged aside, an old woman peeping, nose white flattened against the pane. Thanking her stars, she was passed over.
Extraordinary the interest they take in a corpse. Slop about in slipper slappers for fear he'd wake. Then getting it ready, laying it out. Never know who'll touch you dead. Wash and shampoo. I believe they clip the nails and the hair. Keep a bit in an envelope. Grows all the same after. Unclean job.
All waited, nothing was said.
Stowing in the wreaths, probably. I'm sitting on something hard. Oh, that soap in my hip pocket. Better shift it out of that. Wait for an opportunity.
All waited. Then wheels were heard from in front, turning, then nearer, then horses' hoofs. A jolt. Their carriage began to move, creaking and swaying. Other hoofs and creaking wheels started behind. The blinds of the avenue passed, and number 9 with its craped knocker door ajar. At walking pace, all watched a while through their windows, caps and hats lifted by passers. Respect. The carriage swerved from the tram track to the smoother road past Watery Lane. Mr. Bloom, at gaze, saw a lithe young man clad in mourning, a wide hat.
There's a friend of yours gone by, Dedalus, he said.
Who is that?
Your son and heir.
Where is he? Mr. Dedalus said, stretching over across.
The carriage, passing the open drains and mounds of ripped-up roadway before the tenement houses, lurched round the corner and, swerving back to the tram track, rolled on noisily with chattering wheels. Mr. Dedalus fell back, saying,
Was that Mulligan cad with him? His feed is Achates.
No, Mr. Bloom said. He was alone.
He's in with a low-down crowd, Mr. Dedalus snarled. That Mulligan is a contaminated, bloody, double-dyed ruffian by all accounts. His name stinks all over Dublin. But with the help of God and his blessed mother, I'll make it my business to write a letter one of those days to his mother, or his aunt, or whatever she is that will open her eye as wide as a gate. I'll tickle his catastrophe. Believe you me?
He ceased. Mr. Bloom, glancing from his angry moustache to Mr. Power's mild face and Martin Cunningham's eyes and beard, gravely shaking.
Noisy, self-willed man. Full of his son. He's right. Something to hand on. If little Rudy had lived, see him grow up, hear his voice in the house, walking beside Molly in an Eton suit. My son. Me in his eyes. Strange feeling it would be. From me. Just a chance. Must have been that morning in Raymond Terrace. She was at the window watching the two dogs at it by the wall of the Cease to Do Evil, and the sergeant grinning up. She had that cream gown on with the rip she never stitched. Oh, give us a touch, Poldy. God, I'm dying for it. How life begins. Got big then. Had to refuse the Greystones concert. My son inside her. I could have helped him on in life, I could. Make him independent. Learn German, too.
Are we late? Mr. Powell asked.
10 minutes, Martin Cunningham said, looking at his watch.
Molly Millie. Same thing, watered down. Her tomboy oaths. Oh, jumping Jupiter. Ye gods and little fishes. Still, she's a dear girl. Soon be a woman. Mulligan, dearest Papley, young student. Yes, yes. A woman too. Life, life.
Did you read Dan Dawson's speech? Martin Cunningham asked.
I did not. Then Mr. Dedalus said, "Where is it?"
In the paper this morning.
Mr. Bloom took the paper from his inside pocket.
No, Mr. Dedalus said quickly. Later on, please.
Mr. Bloom's glance travelled down the edge of the paper, scanning the depths.
Callan, Coleman, Dignam, Fawcett, Lowry, Nauman, Peake. What Peake is that? Is it the chap was in Crosby and Allen's? No. Sexton, Earbright, inked characters fast fading on the frayed breaking paper. Thanks to the little flower, sadly missed, and to the inexpressible grief of his, aged 88 after a long and tedious illness. Month's mind. Quinlan, on whose soul, sweet Jesus, have mercy. It is now a month since dear Henry fled to his home up above in the sky, while his family weeps and mourns his loss, hoping some day to meet him on high. I tore up the envelope. Yes. Where did I put their letter after I read it in the bath? Oh, it's there all right. Dear Henry fled before my patience are exhausted.
How do you do? Martin Cunningham said, raising his palm to his brow in salute.
He doesn't see us, Mr. Powell said. Oh, yes he does. How do you do?
Who? Mr. Dedalus asked.
Blazes boiling, Mr. Power said. There he is, aired in his quiff.
Mr. Dedalus bent across to salute. From the door of the Red Bank, the white disk of a straw hat flashed reply. Spruce figure, passed. Mr. Bloom reviewed the nails of his left hand, then those of his right hand.
The nails, yes. Is there anything more in him that she sees? Fascination. Worst man in Dublin. That keeps him alive. They sometimes feel what a person is. Instinct. But a type like that. My nails. I'm looking at them. Well paired.
He clasped his hands between his knees and, satisfied, sent his vacant glance over their faces.
Mr. Powell asked, "How is the concert tour getting on, Bloom?"
Oh, very well, Mr. Bloom said. I hear great accounts of it. It's a good idea, you see.
Are you going yourself?
Well, no, Mr. Bloom said. In point of fact, I have to go down to the County Clare on some private business. You see, the idea is to tour the chief towns. See, what you lose on one, you can make up on the other.
Quite so, Martin Cunningham said. Have you good artists?
Oh, Louis Warner is touring her, Mr. Bloom said. Oh, yes, we'll have all the top knobbers. J.C. Doyle, John McCormack, I hope, and the best, in fact.
And Madame, Mr. Power said, smiling. Last but not least.
Mr. Bloom unclasped his hands in a gesture of soft politeness and clasped them. They passed under the huge cloaked liberator's form. Martin Cunningham nudged Mr. Power.
Of the tribe of Reuben, he said.
A tall, black-bearded figure, bent on a stick, stumping round the corner of Elvery's elephant house, showed them a curved hand open on his spine. Mr. Bloom began to speak with sudden eagerness to his companions' faces.
Oh, that's an awfully good one that's going the rounds about Reuben J. and the son. There was a girl in the case, Mr. Bloom began, and he determined to send him to the Isle of Man, out of harm's way. But when they were both on their way down to the boat...
What? Mr. Dedalus asked. That confirmed bloody hobble-the-high, is it?
Yes, Mr. Bloom said. They were both on the way to the boat, and he tried to drown...
Drown Barabbas, Mr. Dedalus cried. I wish to Christ he did.
Mr. Power sent a long laugh down his shaded nostrils.
No, Mr. Bloom said. The son himself...
Martin Cunningham thwarted his speech rudely. Reuben and the son were piking it down in the quay next to the river on the way to the Isle of Man boat, and the young chiseler suddenly got loose and over the wall with him into the Liffey.
For God's sake, Mr. Dedalus exclaimed in fright. Is he dead?
Dead, Martin Cunningham cried. Not he. A boatman got a pole and fished him out by the slack of his breeches. And he was landed up to the father on the quay, more dead than alive. Half the town was there.
Yes, Mr. Bloom said. But the funny
And
part
Reuben
is...
J., Martin Cunningham said, gave the boatman a florin for saving his son's life.
A stifled sigh came from under Mr. Power's hand.
Oh, he did, Martin Cunningham affirmed. Like a hero, a silver florin.
Isn't it awfully good? Mr. Bloom said eagerly.
1 and 8pence too much, Mr. Dedalus said dryly.
Mr. Power's choked laugh burst quietly in the carriage. Nelson's pillar.
8 plums a penny, 8 for a penny.
We had better look a little serious, Martin Cunningham said.
Mr. Dedalus sighed. White horses with white frontlet plumes came round the rotunda corner, galloping. A tiny coffin passed by.
Sad, Martin Cunningham said. A child in the midst of life, Martin Cunningham said.
But the worst of all, Mr. Power said, is the man who takes his own life.
Martin Cunningham drew out his watch briskly, coughed and put it back.
The greatest disgrace to have in the family, Mr. Power added.
Temporary insanity, of course, Martin Cunningham said decisively. We must take a charitable view of it.
They say a man who does it is a coward, Mr. Dedalus said.
It is not for us to judge, Martin Cunningham said.
Mr. Bloom, about to speak, closed his lips again.
Martin Cunningham's large eyes looking away now. Sympathetic human man he is. Intelligent, like Shakespeare's face. Always a good word to say. He looked away from me. He knows. That afternoon of the inquest, the red-labelled bottle on the table, the room in the hotel with hunting pictures, stuffy it was, sunlight through the slats of the Venetian blind, the coroner's sunlit ears, big and hairy, boots giving evidence, thought he was asleep first, then saw like yellow streaks on his face, had slipped down to the foot of the bed. Verdict, overdose, death by misadventure. The letter, for my son Leopold. No more pain, wake no more.
As they turned into Berkeley Street, a street organ near the basin sent over and after them a rollicking, rattling song of the halls. Has anybody here seen Kelly? Kelly? He's as bad as old Antonio, he left me on me onio. The felly harshed against the curbstone, stopped. Martin Cunningham put out his arm and, wrenching back the handle, shoved the door open with his knee. He stepped out. Mr. Power and Mr. Dedalus followed.
Change that soap now.
Mr. Bloom's hand unbuttoned his hip pocket swiftly and transferred the paper-stuck soap to his inner handkerchief pocket. He stepped out of the carriage, replacing the newspaper his other hand still held.
Martin Cunningham whispered, I was in mortal agony with you talking of suicide before Bloom.
What? Mr. Power whispered. How so?
His father poisoned himself, Martin Cunningham whispered. Had the Queen's Hotel in Ennis. You heard him say he was going to Clare. Anniversary.
Oh, God, Mr. Power whispered. First I heard of it. Poisoned himself.
The barrow turned into a side lane. A portly man, ambushed among the grasses, raised his hat in homage. The grave diggers touched their caps.
John O'Connell, Mr. Power said, pleased. He never forgets a friend.
Mr. O'Connell shook all their hands in silence. He walked on at Martin Cunningham's side, puzzling 2 long keys at his bag.
Did you hear the one, he asked them, about Mulcahy from the Coombe?
I did not, Martin Cunningham said.
They bent their silk hats in concert, and Hines inclined his ear. The caretaker hung his thumbs in the loops of his gold watch chain and spoke in a discreet tone to their vacant smiles.
They tell the story, he said, that 2 drunks came out here one foggy evening to look for the grave of a friend of theirs. They asked for Mulcahy from the Coombe and were told where he was buried. After traipsing about in the fog, they found the grave, sure enough. One of the drunks spelt out his name, Terence Mulcahy. The other drunk was blinking up at a statue of our saviour, the widow, had got put up, and after blinking up at the second sacred figure, not a bloody bit like the man, says he. That's not Mulcahy, says he. Whoever done it?
Hines jotting down something in his notebook. Ah, the names. Sure he knows them all. No, coming to me.
I am just taking the names, Hines said below his breath. What is your Christian name? I'm not sure.
Mr. Bloom said, Leopold. You might put down McCoy's name too. He asked me to.
Charlie, Hines said, writing. I know. He was on the Freeman once. And tell us, Hines said, do you know that fellow in the...
In the Macintosh.
Fellow was over there in the...
Macintosh. Yes, I saw him, Mr. Bloom said. Where is he now?
Macintosh, Hines said, scribbling. I don't know who he is. Is that his name?
He moved away, looking about him.
No, Mr. Bloom began, turning and stopping. No, I say, Hines. Didn't hear. What? Where has he disappeared to? Not a sign. Well, of all the... Has anybody here seen K-E-double-L? Become invisible. Good Lord, what became of him?
From a spot called Tipperary, the hearts of all the girls I am a thorn in. But before the break of morn, faith till they be forlorn. For I'm off to Philadelphia in the morning. With my bundle on my shoulder, faith there's no man could be bolder. I'm leaving dear old Ireland without warning. But lately took the notion for to cross the briny ocean, and I start for Philadelphia in the morning. There's a girl called Kate Malone who might hope to call me home and to see my little cabin for a dawning. But my heart is sad and weary. How could she be Mrs. Leary if I start for Philadelphia in the morning? With my bundle on my shoulder, faith there's no man could be bolder. I'm leaving dear old Ireland without warning. For I lately took the notion for to cross that briny ocean, and I start for Philadelphia in the morning. When they told me I must leave the place, I tried to keep a cheerful face, for to show my heart's deep sorrow I was scorning. for the friends I leave behind me when I start for Philadelphia in the morning. But though my bundle's on my shoulder and there's no man could be bolder, though I'm leaving now the spot that I was born in, yet someday I'll take the notion to come back across the ocean to my home in dear old Ireland in the morning.
That song, Off to Philadelphia, was written before 1900. Has anybody here seen Kelly, that you heard before, was written in 1909. Now, it's not often that you catch James Joyce using an anachronism, but the action of Ulysses takes place in 1904. A mistake? Of course not. A man of genius makes no mistakes. His errors are volitional and are the portals of discovery. The next two readings relate to Stephen's theory of Hamlet. We first hear about it in the morning at the Martello Tower, where Stephen and Buck Mulligan live. Mulligan casually mentions the theory to Haynes, their English visitor.
Haynes from the corner, where he was knotting easily a scarf about the loose collar of his tennis shirt, spoke.
I intend to make a collection of your sayings, if you will let me.
Buck Mulligan kicked Stephen's foot under the table and said with warmth of tone,
Wait till you hear him on Hamlet, Haynes.
What is your idea of Hamlet? Haynes asked.
Oh, no, no! Oh, Buck Mulligan shouted in pain. Wait till I have a few pints in me first.
He turned to Stephen, saying, as he pulled down neatly the peaks of his primrose waistcoat,
Oh, you couldn't manage it under 3 pints, Kinch, could you?
It has waited so long, Stephen said listlessly. It can wait longer.
You pique my curiosity, Haynes said amiably. Is it some paradox?
Pooh! Buck Mulligan said. We've grown out of wild and paradoxes. It's quite simple. He proves by algebra that Hamlet's grandson is Shakespeare's grandfather and that he himself is the ghost of his own father.
What? Haynes said, beginning to point at Stephen. He himself.
We're always tired in the morning, Stephen said to Haynes, and it is rather long to tell.
Buck Mulligan, walking forward again, raised his hands.
The sacred pint alone can unbind the tongue of Daedalus, he said.
I mean to say, Haynes explained to Stephen as they followed, this tower and these cliffs here remind me somehow of Elsinore. That beetles oared his base into the sea, isn't it? It's a wonderful tale, Haynes said.
At the National Library in the afternoon, Stephen has a chance to deliver his Hamlet theory. Present are the librarians, John Eglinton and Richard Best, George Russell, a writer and editor known as A.E., and later, Buck Mulligan. Stephen's presentation is an intellectual exercise that he has practiced and now has an opportunity to demonstrate to some of Dublin's best minds. The premise is that Shakespeare's persona is not Hamlet, but rather Hamlet's father, the murdered king. Incidentally, Haynes, who was so eager to hear Stephen's theory, has left the library.
Young Irish bards, John Eglinton censured, have yet to create a figure which the world will set beside Saxon Shakespeare's Hamlet, though I admire him as old Ben did on this side of idolatry.
All these questions are purely academic, Russell oracled out of his shadow. I mean, whether Hamlet is Shakespeare or James I or Essex, art has to reveal to us ideas, formless spiritual essences. The supreme question about a work of art is, out of how deep a life does it spring? The painting of Gustave Moreau is the painting of ideas. The deepest poetry of Shelley, the words of Hamlet, bring our minds into contact with the eternal wisdom, Plato's world of ideas.
Mr. Best came forward, amiable, towards his colleagues.
Haynes is gone, he said.
Is he?
I was showing him Jubenville's book. He's quite enthusiastic, don't you know, about Hyde's Love Song of Connacht. I couldn't bring him in to hear the discussion. He's gone to Guilds to buy it.
That peach smoke's gone to his head, John Eglinton opined. Dennis will have it that Hamlet is a ghost story, John Eglinton said for Mr. Best's behoof. Like the fat boy in Pickwick, he wants to make our flesh creep.
List, list, oh list. My flesh hears him creeping, hears. If thou didst ever. What is a ghost? Stephen said with tingling energy. One has faded into impalpability through death, through absence, through change of manners. Elizabethan London lay as far from Stratford as corrupt Paris lies from virgin Dublin. Who is the ghost from Limbo Patrum, returning to the world that has forgotten him? Who is King Hamlet? It is this hour of a day in mid-June, Stephen said, begging with a swift glance their hearing. The flag is up on the playhouse by the bankside. The bear Saxerson growls in the pit near it. Paris Garden. Canvas climbers who sailed with Drake chew their sausages among the groundlings. Local colour. Work in all you know. Make them accomplices. Shakespeare has left the Huguenot's house in Silver Street and walks by the Swan Mews along the riverbank. But he does not stay to feed the pen chiving her game of cygnets towards the rushes. The Swan of Avon has other thoughts. The play begins. A player comes on under the shadow, made up in the cast-off mail of a court book, a well-set man with a bass voice. It is the ghost, the king. A king, no king. And the player is Shakespeare, who has studied Hamlet all the years of his life, which were not vanity, in order to play the part of the spectre. He speaks the words to Burbage, the young player who stands before him, calling him by a name. Hamlet, I am thy father's spirit, bidding him list. To a son he speaks, the son of his soul, the prince, young Hamlet, and to the son of his body, Hamlet Shakespeare, who has died in Stratford, that his namesake may live forever. Is it possible that player Shakespeare, a ghost by absence, and in the vesture of buried Denmark, a ghost by death, speaking his own words to his own son's name, had Hamlet Shakespeare lived, he would have been Prince Hamlet's twin. Is it possible? I want to know. Or probable that he did not draw or foresee the logical conclusion of those premises. You are the dispossessed son, I am the murdered father, your mother is the guilty queen, Anne Shakespeare, born Hathaway.
But this prying into the family life of a great man, Russell began impatiently, interesting only to the parish clerk. I mean, we have the plays. I mean, when we read the poetry of King Lear, what is it to us how the poet lived? Peeping and praying into green room gossip of the day, the poet's drinking, the poet's debts. We have King Lear, and it is immortal.
How now, sirrah? The pound he lent you when you were hungry? Marry, I wanted it. Take thou this noble. Go to. You spent most of it in Georgina Johnson's bed. Clergyman's daughter. Agon bite of inwit. Do you intend to pay it back? Oh, yes. When? Now? Well, no. When then? I paid my way. I paid my way. Steady on. You owe it. Wait. 5 months, molecules all change. I am other I now. Other I got pound. Buzz, buzz, but I entelechy, form of forms, am I by memory, because under ever-changing forms, I that sinned and prayed and fasted, a child con me saved from pandies. I, and I, A-E, I-O-U.
Do you mean to fly in the face of the tradition of 3 centuries? John Eglinton's carping voice asked. Her ghost, at least, has been laid forever. She died, for literature at least, before she was born.
She died, Stephen retorted, 67 years after she was born. She saw him into and out of the world. She took his first embraces, she bore his children, and she laid pennies on his eyes to keep his eyelids closed when he lay on his deathbed.
John Eglinton looked in the tangled glowworm of his lamp.
The world believes that Shakespeare made a mistake, he said, and got out of it as quickly and as best he could.
Bosh, Stephen said rudely. A man of genius makes no mistakes. His errors are volitional and are the portals of discovery.
But Anne Hathaway, Mr. Best's quiet voice said forgetfully, yes, we seem to be forgetting her as Shakespeare himself forgot her.
He had a good groat's worth of wit, Stephen said, and no truant memory. He carried a memory in his wallet as he trudged to Romeville, whistling, "The girl I left behind me." Do you think the writer of Antony and Cleopatra, a passionate pilgrim, had his eyes in the back of his head, and he chose the ugliest doxy in all of Warwickshire to lie withal? Good. He left her and gained the world of men, but his boy women are the women of a boy. Their life, thought, speech are lent them by males. He chose badly? He was chosen, it seems to me. If others have their will, Anne hath a way. By cock, she was to blame. She put the come hither on him, sweet and 26, the grey-eyed goddess who bends over the boy Adonis, stooping to conquer, as prologue to the swelling act, is a bold-faced Stratford wench who tumbles in a cornfield, a lover younger than herself.
Ryfield, Mr. Best said brightly, gladly, raising his new book, gladly, brightly.
He murmured then, with blonde delight for all.
Between the acres of the rye, these pretty country folk would lie. Mr. Dedalus, your views are most illuminating.
He creaked to and fro, tiptoeing up nearer heaven by the altitude of a chapine, and, covered by the noise of outgoing, said low.
Is it your view, then, that she was not faithful to the poet?
Where there is a reconciliation, Stephen said, there must have been first a sundering.
Yes.
Certainly. John Eglinton mused. Of all great men, he's the most enigmatic. We know nothing but that he lived and suffered, not even so much. Others abide our question. A shadow hangs over all the rest.
But Hamlet is so personal, isn't it? Mr. Best pleaded. I mean, a kind of private paper, don't you know, of his private life. I mean, I don't care a button, don't you know, who's killed or who's guilty.
I was prepared for paradoxes from what Malachi Mulligan told us, but I may as well warn you that if you want to shake my belief that Shakespeare's Hamlet, you have a stern task before you.
Yes, Mr. Best said youngly. I feel Hamlet's quite young. The bitterness might be from the father, but the passage with Ophelia are surely from the son.
He was overborn in a cornfield first, rye field, I should say, and he will never be a victor in his own eyes. There is, I feel, in the words, some goad of the flesh driving him into a new passion, a darker shadow of the first, darkening even his own understanding of himself. They list, and in the porches of their ears I pour. The soul has been before stricken mortally. a poison poured in the porch of his sleeping ear. But those who are damned to death in sleep cannot know the manner of their quell unless their Creator endow their souls with that knowledge in the life to come. The poisoning and the beast with two backs that urged it, King Hamlet's ghost, could not know of were he not endowed with knowledge by his Creator. His beaver is up. He is a ghost, a shadow now. The wind by Elsinor's rocks, or what you will, the sea's voice. A voice heard only in the heart of him who is the substance of his shadow, the Son consubstantial with the Father.
Amen!
Was responded from the doorway.
Hast thou found me, O mine enemy?
A ribald face, sullen as a dean's. Buck Mulligan came forward, then blithe and motley, towards the greeting of their smiles.
My telegram.
You were speaking of the gaseous vertebrate, if I mistake not, he asked of Stephen.
Yes, indeed, John Eglinton said. A most instructive discussion. Mr. Mulligan, I'll be bound, has a theory of the play and of Shakespeare, too. All sides of life should be represented.
He smiled, on all sides, equally. Buck Mulligan thought, puzzled.
Shakespeare, he said. I seem to know the name.
A flying, sunny smile rayed in his loose features.
To be sure, he said, remembering brightly. The chap that writes like Sing. It's what I'm telling you, Mr. Honey. It's queer and sick we were, Haynes and myself, the time himself brought it in. 'Twas murmur we did for a gallus potion would rouse the friar, I'm thinking, and he limp with leching. And we 1 hour and 2 hours and 3 hours in Connery's sitting civil waiting for pints apiece. And we to be there, Mavrone, and you to be unbeknownst sending us your conglomerations, the way we to have our tongues out a yard long, like the drouthy clerics to be fainting for a pussful.
Stephen laughed.
We want to hear more, John Eglinton decided with Mr. Best's approval. We begin to be interested in Mrs. S. Till now we had thought of her, if at all, as a patient Griselda, a Penelope stay-at-home.
20 years he lived in London, and during part of that time he drew a salary equal to that of the Lord Chancellor of Ireland. His life was rich. His art is the art of surfeit. Hot herring pies, green mugs of sack, honey sauces, sugar of roses, marchpane, gooseberried pigeons, Ringo candies. 20 years he dallied there between conjugal love and its chaste delights and scortatory love and its foul pleasures. You know Manningham's story of the burgher's wife who bade Dick Burbage to her bed after she'd seen him in Richard III? How Shakespeare, overhearing, without more ado, about nothing, tucked the cow by the horns, and when Burbage came knocking at the gate, answered from the capon's blankets, "William the Conqueror came before Richard III." But all those 20 years, what do you suppose poor Penelope in Stratford was doing behind the diamond panes? 2 deeds are rank in that ghost's mind, a broken vow and the dull-brained yokel on whom her favour has declined. Deceased husband's brother, sweet Anne, I take it, was hot in the blood. Once a wooer, twice a wooer.
Stephen turned boldly in his chair.
The burden of proof is with you, not with me, he said, frowning. If you deny that in the 5th scene of Hamlet, he has branded her with infamy, tell me why there is no mention of her during the 34 years between the day she married him and the day she buried him. Oh yes, mention there is. In the years when he was living richly in royal London, to pay a debt, she had to borrow 40 shillings from her father's shepherd. Explain you then. Explain the swan song too, wherein he has commended her to posterity.
He faced their silence. To whom thus, Eglinton?
You mean the will? Well, he left her his second best bed.
He was a rich country gentleman, Stephen said, with a coat of arms and landed estate at Stratford and a house in Ireland Yard, a capitalist shareholder, a bill promoter, a tithe farmer. Why did he not leave her his best bed? if he wished her to snore away the rest of her nights in peace.
It is clear that there were two beds, a best and a second best. Mr. Second Best said finally.
He wrote the play in the months that followed his father's death. If you hold that he, a greying man with 2 marriageable daughters, with 35 years of life, with 50 of experience, is the beardless undergraduate from Wittenberg, then you must hold that his 70-year-old mother is the lustful queen. No, the corpse of John Shakespeare does not walk the night. When Rutland Bacon, Southampton Shakespeare, or another poet of the same name wrote Hamlet, he was not the father of his own son, merely but being no more a son. He was and felt himself the father of all his race, the father of his own grandfather, the father of his unborn grandson. As for his family, Stephen said, Hamlet, the Black Prince, is Hamlet Shakespeare. But there is another member of his family who is recorded. He had 3 brothers, Gilbert, Edmund, Richard. The playhouse sausage filled Gilbert's soul. He is nowhere, but an Edmund and a Richard are recorded in the works of Sweet William. In his trinity of black wills, the villain Shakebags, Iago, Richard Crookback, Edmund and King Lear, 2 bear the wicked uncle's names. Nay, that last play was written or being written while his brother Edmund lay dying in Southwark. You will say those names were already in the chronicles from which he took the stuff of his plays. Why did he take them then rather than others? Richard, a whoreson Crookback, misbegotten, makes love to widowed Anne. What's in the name? Woos and Windsor, a whoreson merry widow. Richard the Conqueror, the 3rd brother, came after William the Conquered. The other 4 acts of that play hang limply from that first. Of all his kings, Richard is the only king unshielded by Shakespeare's reverence. Why is the underplot of King Lear, in which Edmund figures spatchcocked onto a Celtic legend older than history? Why? Stephen answered himself, because the theme of the false, or the usurping, or the adulterous brother, or all 3 in one, is to Shakespeare always with him.
Judge Eglinton summed up.
The truth is midway, he affirmed. He is the ghost and the prince. He is all in all.
He is, Stephen said. The boy of Act 1 is the mature man of Act 5. All in all.
Eureka! Buck Mulligan cried. Eureka!
You are a delusion, said roundly John Eglinton to Stephen. You have brought us all this way to show us a French triangle. Do you believe your own theory?
No, Stephen said promptly.
Down by the Sally Gardens, my love and I did meet. She passed the Sally Gardens with little snow white feet. She bid me take love easy as the leaves grow on the tree. But I, being young and foolish, with her did not agree. her snow white hand. She bid me take life easy as the grass grows on the whiz. But I was young and foolish, and now am full of tears. Of all the girls that are so smart, there's none like pretty Sally. She is the darling of my heart and lives in our alley. There is no lady in the land that half as sweet as Sally. She's the darling of my heart and lives in our alley. Of all the days within the week, I dearly love but one day, and that's the day that comes betwixt the Saturday and Monday. Oh, then I'm dressed all in my best to walk abroad with Sally. She's the darling of my heart and lives in our alley. My master and the neighbors all make game of me and Sally, and but for her I'd rather be a slave and row a galley. But when my 7 long years are out, oh, then I'll marry Sally, and then how happily we'll live, but not in our alley.
The lyrics to the first song you just heard, Down by the Sally Gardens, are from a poem by William Butler Yeats. A Sally is a willow tree. The Cyclops figure in Ulysses is a sullen, bitter Irish chauvinist called the Citizen, who holds down a bar stool at Barney Kiernan's pub. The main narrative of the episode has Bloom meeting Martin Cunningham at the pub, from where they will visit Patty Dignam's widow to help her with insurance matters. Tonight's reading will not focus on the main narrative, but on the interruptions of the storyline. These parodies spin off from the narrative and are exaggerated and fantastical. Like many other parts of Ulysses, the narrative style takes on a life of its own. The parodies are all wonderfully Joycean, but just to get you in the right mood, I'll mention one of my favorites. After the citizen spits, he wipes his mouth with a handkerchief, which in the parody becomes an ancient Irish face cloth with much embroidery of lovely scenery. and the rich incrustations of time.
So we turned into Barney Kiernan's, and there, sure enough, was the citizen, up in the corner having a great confab with himself and that bloody mangy mongrel Gary Owen, and he waiting for what the sky would drop in the way of drink.
3 points, Terry, says Joe. And how's the old heart citizen, says he?
Never better, says he. But, Gary, are we going to win, eh?
And with that, he took the bloody old Towser by the scruff of the neck, and by Jesus, he nearly throttled him.
The figure seated on a large boulder at the foot of a round tower was that of a broad-shouldered, deep-chested, strong-limbed, frank-eyed, red-haired, freely freckled, shaggy-bearded, wide-mouthed, large-nosed, long-headed, deep-voiced, bare-kneed, brawny-handed, hairy-legged, ruddy-faced, sinewy-armed hero. From shoulder to shoulder he measured several ells, and his rock-like mountainous knees were covered, as was likewise the rest of his body wherever visible, with a strong growth of tawny, prickly hair in hue and toughness similar to the mountain gorse. The wide-winged nostrils, from which bristles of the same tawny hue projected, were of such capaciousness that within their cavernous obscurity the field lark might easily have lodged her nest.
The eyes, in which a tear and a smile strove ever for the mastery, were of the dimensions of good-sized cauliflower. A powerful current of warm breath issued at regular intervals from the profound cavity of his mouth, while in rhythmic resonance the loud, strong, hail reverberations of his formidable heart thundered, rumbling, causing the ground, the summit of the lofty tower, and still lofty walls of the cave to vibrate and tremble.
He wore a long, unsleeved garment of recently flayed oxhide, reaching to the knees in a loose kilt. This was bound about his middle by a girdle of plaited straw and rushes. From his girdle hung a row of sea stones, which jangled at every movement of his portentous frame. And on these were graven with rude yet striking art the tribal images of many Irish heroes and heroines of antiquity. Cuchulainn, Conn of 100 battles, Niall of 9 hostages, Brian of Kincora, Goliath, the village blacksmith, Captain Moonlight, Captain Boycott, Dante Alighieri, Christopher Columbus, Charlemagne.
Theobald Wolfe Tone, the mother of Maccabees, the last of the Mohicans, the Rose of Castile, the man for Galway, the man that broke the bank of Monte Carlo, the man in the gap, the woman who didn't, Benjamin Franklin, Napoleon Bonaparte, John L. Sullivan, Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, Paracelsus, William Tell, Mohammed, the bride of Lammermoor, Patrick W. Shakespeare, Brian Confucius, Murtaugh Gutenberg, Captain Nemo, Tristan and Isolde, the first Prince of Wales, Thomas Cook and Son, Arana Pogue, Ludwig Beethoven, the Colleen Bawn, Ben Houth, Adam and Eve, Arthur Wellesley, Herodotus, Jack the Giant Killer, Gautama Buddha, Lady Godiva, the Lily of Killarney, the Queen of Sheba, Alessandro Volta.
A couch spear of acuminated granite rested by him, while at his feet reposed a savage animal of the canine tribe, whose stertorous gasps announced that he was sunk in an uneasy slumber, a supposition confirmed by hoarse growls and by spasmodic movements which his master repressed from time to time by tranquilizing blows of a mighty cudgel rudely fashioned out of Paleolithic stone.
So they started talking about capital punishment, and of course Bloom comes out with the why and the wherefore, and all the codology of the business. And the old dog, smelling them all the time. I'm told those Jewies does have a sort of queer odour off them for dogs about I don't know what all, deterrent effect and so forth and so on.
There's one thing that hasn't a deterrent effect on, says Alf.
What's that, says Joe.
The poor bugger's tool that's been hanged, says Alf.
That's so, says Joe.
God's truth, says Alf. I heard it from the head warder that was in Kilmainham when they hanged Joe Brady, the Invincible. He told me that when they cut him down after the drop, it was standing up in their faces like a poker.
That can be explained by science, says Bloom. It's only a natural phenomenon, don't you see? Because on
And
account
then he
of the-
starts with his jawbreakers about phenomenon and science. And this phenomenon and the other phenomenon.
The distinguished scientist, Herr Professor Luitpold Blumenduft, tendered medical evidence to the effect that the instantaneous fracture of the cervical vertebrae and consequent scission of the spinal cord would, according to the best approved tradition of medical science, be calculated to inevitably produce in the human subject a violent ganglionic stimulus of the nerve centers of the genital apparatus, thereby causing the elastic pores of the corpora cavernosa to rapidly dilate in such a way as to instantaneously facilitate the flow of blood to that part of the human anatomy known as the penis, or male organ, resulting in the phenomenon which has been denominated by the faculty a morbid upwards and outwards philoprogenitive erection.
As treeless as Portugal will be soon, says John Wise. Or Heligoland with its one tree, if something is not done to reforest the land. Larches, firs, all the trees of the conifer family are going fast. I was reading a report of Lord Castletown's.
Save them, says the citizen. The giant arch of Galway and the chieftain elm of Kildare, with a 40-foot bole and an acre of foliage. Save the trees of Ireland for the future men of Ireland on the fair hills of Ayr. Oh.
Europe has its eye on you, says Lenihan.
The fashionable international world attended en masse this afternoon at the wedding of the Chevalier Jean Wise de Nolan, Grand High Chief Ranger of the Irish National Foresters, with Miss Fir Conifer of Pine Valley, Lady Sylvester Elmshade, Mrs. Barbara Lovebirch, Mrs. Paul Ash, Mrs. Holly Hazel Eyes, Miss Daphne Bays, Mrs. Clyde Twelvetrees, Mrs. Rowan Green, Mrs. Helen Vine Gadding, Miss Virginia Creeper, Miss Gladys Beach, Miss Olive Garth, Miss Blanche Maple, Mrs. Maud Mahogany, Miss Marta Myrtle, Miss Grace Poplar, Miss O. Mimosa San, Miss Rachel Cedarfrond, the Mrs. Lillian and Viola Lilac, Miss Timidity Aspinall, Mrs. Kitty Dewey Moss, Miss May Hawthorne, Mrs. Gloriana Palma, Mrs. Arabella Blackwood, and Mrs. Norma Holyoke graced the ceremony by their presence.
The bride who was given away by her father, the McConifer of the Glands, looked exquisitely charming in a creation carried out in green mercerized silk, moulded on an underslip of gloaming grey, sashed with a yoke of broad emerald and finished with a triple flounce of darker-hued fringe, the scheme being relieved by bretelles and hip insertions of acorn bronze. The maids of honour, Miss Larch Conifer and Miss Spruce Conifer, sisters of the bride, wore very becoming costumes in the same tone, a dainty motif of plume rose being worked into the pleats in a pinstripe and repeated capriciously in the jade-green toques in the form of heron feathers of pale-tinted coral. Signor Enrique Flor presided at the organ with his well-known ability and, in addition to the prescribed numbers of the nuptial mass, played a new and striking arrangement of Woodman, spare that tree at the conclusion of the service.
On leaving the church of St. Ficra, after the papal blessing, the happy pair were subjected to a playful crossfire of hazelnuts, beech masts, bay leaves, catkins of willow, ivy tot, hollyberries, mistletoe sprigs, and quicken shoots. Mr. and Mrs. Weiss Conifer Newlyn will spend a quiet honeymoon in the Black Forest.
The citizens had not only cleared the spit out of his gullet, and gob he spat a red bank oyster out of them right in the corner.
After you with the push, Joe, says he, taking out his handkerchief to swab himself dry.
The much treasured and intricately embroidered ancient Irish face cloth, attributed to Solomon of Droma and Manus Tommeltuck Og MacDonough, authors of the Book of Ballymote, was then carefully produced and called forth prolonged admiration. No need to dwell on the legendary beauty of the corner pieces, the acme of art, wherein one can distinctly discern each of the four evangelists, in turn presenting to each of the four masters his evangelical symbol, a bog oak scepter, a North American puma, a Kerry calf, and a golden eagle from Carnthill.
The scenes depicted on the emunctory field, showing our ancient duns and raths and comlachs and grianons and seats of learning and maledictive stones, are as wonderfully beautiful, and the pigments as delicate as when the Sligo illuminators gave free rein to their artistic fantasy long, long ago in the time of the Barmecides.
Glendalough, the lovely lakes of Killarney, the ruins of Clonmacnoise, Cong Abbey, Glen Ena and the 12 Pins, Ireland's Eye, the brewery of Messrs. Arthur Guinness, San and Company Limited, Loch Ness Banks, Esal's Tower, Cape Clear, the Glen of Aherlow, Lynch's Castle, Tullamore Jail, Castle Connell Rapids, Killy, Ballymacshonnakill, Jury's Hotel, St. Patrick's Purgatory, the Salmon Leap, Minute College Refectory, the three birthplaces of the first Duke of Wellington, the Rock of Cashel, the Bog of Allen, the Henry Street Warehouse, Fingal's Cave, all of these moving scenes are still there for us today, rendered more beautiful still by the waters of sorrow which have passed over them and by the rich incrustations of time.
Sure enough, the castle car drove up with Martin on it, and Jack Power with him, and a fellow named Crofter or Crofton, pensioner out of the Collector General's. An Orangeman Blackburn does have on the registration, and he'd drawn his pay, or Crawford, gallivanting around the country at the king's expense.
Our travellers reached the rustic hostelry and alighted from their palfreys.
Ho, varlet, cried he who by his means seemed the leader of the party. Saucy knave, to us!
So saying, he knocked loudly with his sword hilt upon the open lattice. Mine host came forth at the summons, girding him with his tabard.
Give ye good den, my master, said he with an obsequious bow.
Stir thyself, sirrah, cried he who had knocked. Look to our steeds, and for ourselves, give us your best, for faith we need it.
Lack a day, good master, said the host. My poor house has but a bare larder. I know not what to offer ye lordships.
"I know, fellow," cried the second of the party, a man of pleasant countenance. "So servest thou the king's messengers, Master Tapton?"
An instantaneous change o'erspread the landlord's visage.
Cry your mercy, gentlemen, he said humbly. And you be the king's messengers? God shield his majesty, you shall not want for aught. The king's friends, God bless his majesty, shall not go a fasting in my house, I warrant me.
Then about! cried the traveller who had not spoken, a lusty trencherman by his aspect. Hast aught to give us?
Mine host bowed again as he made answer.
What say you, good masters, to a squab pigeon pasty? Some collops of venison, a saddle of veal, widgeon with crisp hog's bacon, a boar's head with pistachios, a basin of jolly custard, a medlar tansy, and a flagon of old Rhenish.
Gadzooks, cried the last speaker. That likes me well. Pistachios.
Ah, cried he of the pleasant countenance. A poor house and a bare larder, quotha! 'Tis a merry rogue.
Have you time for a brief libation, Martin?
Only one, says Martin. We must be quick, JJNS.
You, Jack. Crofton. 3 half-ones, Terry.
Well, says Martin, rapping for his glass. God bless all here is my prayer.
Amen, says the citizen.
And I'm sure he will, says Joe.
And at the sound of the sacred bell, headed by a crucifer with acolytes, thurifers, boat-bearers, readers, ostiary, deacons and subdeacons, the blessed company drew nigh of mitred abbots and priors and guardians and monks and friars, the monks of Benedict of Spoleto, Carthusians and Oratorians and Vallambrosans, and the friars of Augustine and Trinitarians, and therewith from Carmel Mount the children of Elijah prophet, led by Albert Bishop and by Teresa of Avila, and friars, brown and grey, sons of poor Francis, Capuchins, Cordeliers, and observants, and the confraternity of the Christian brothers, led by the Reverend Brother Edmund Ignatius Royce.
And after came all saints and martyrs, virgins and confessors, St. Cyr and St. Isidore Arator, and St. James the Less, and St. Vincent de Paul, and St. Martin of Todi, and St. Martin of Tours, and St. Denis, and St. Cornelius, and St. Leopold, and St. Bernard, and St. Anonymous, and St. Eponymous, and St. Pseudonymous, and St. Homonymus, and St. Peronymus, and St. Synonymous, and St. Lawrence O'Toole, and St. James of Dingle, and Compostela, and St. Thomas Aquinas, and St. Eve of Brittany, and St. Michon, and the Saints Gervasius, Erasius, and Bonifacius, and Brother Aloysius Pacificus, and Brother Louis Bellicosus, and St. Mary of Egypt, and St. Lucy, and St. Bridget, and the Blessed Sister Teresa of the Child Jesus, and St. Barbara, and St. Scholastica, and St. Ursula with 11,000 virgins.
And all came with nimbi and aureolas and gloriae, bearing palms and harps and swords and olive crowns, in robes whereon were woven the blessed symbols of their efficacies, inkhorns, arrows, loaves, cruises, fetters, axes, trees, bridges, babes in the bathtub, shells, wallets, shears, keys, dragons, lilies, buckshot, beards, hogs, lamps, bellows, beehives, soup ladles, stars, snakes, anvils, boxes of Vaseline, bells, crutches, forceps, stag's horns, watertight boots, hawks, millstones, eyes on a dish, wax candles, aspergills, unicorns. And as they wended their way by Nelson's Pillar, Henry Street, Mary Street, Capel Street, Little Britain Street, chanting the introit in Epiphania Domini, which beginneth Sergei Illuminare, and they did divers wonders, such as casting out devils, raising the dead to life, multiplying fishes, healing the halt and the blind, discovering various articles which had been mislaid, interpreting and fulfilling the scriptures, blessing and prophesying.
And last, beneath a canopy of cloth of gold, came the Reverend Father O'Flynn, attended by Malachi and Patrick. And when the good fathers had reached the appointed place, the house of Bernard Kiernan and Co., Limited, 8, 9, and 10 Little Britain Street, wholesale grocers, wine and brandy shippers, licensed for the sale of beer, wine and spirits on the premises, the celebrant blessed the house and censed the mullion windows, and the groins, and the vaults, and the rises, and the capitals, and the pediments, and the cornices, and the engrailed arches, the spires, and the cupolas, and sprinkled the lintels thereof with blessed water, and prayed that God might bless that house as he had blessed the house of Abraham, and Isaac, and Jacob, and make the angels of his light to inhabit therein. And entering, he blessed the viands and the beverages, and the company of all the blessed answered his prayers.
But begob, I was just lowering the heel of the pint when I saw the citizen getting up to waddle to the door, puffing and blowing with a dropsy, and he cursing the curse of Cromwell on him, bell, book and candle in Irish, spitting and spatting out of him and jowing little Alf round him like a leprechaun, trying to pacify him.
Give us that biscuit back here.
Stop! Stop, says Joe.
Cobb, the devil wouldn't stop until he got hold of that bloody tin anyhow, because he drew his hand and made a swipe and let fly. Mercy of God, the sun was in his eyes, or he'd have left him for dead. Cobb, he near sent it into the county Longford. The bloody nag took fright, and the old mongrel after the car like bloody hell, and all the populace shouting and laughing, and the old tin box clattering along the street.
The catastrophe was terrific and instantaneous in its effect. The Observatory of Dancing registered in all 11 shocks of all of the 5th grade of Mercalli's scale, and there is no record extent of a similar seismic disturbance in our island since the earthquake of 1534. The year of the rebellion of Silken Thomas.
The epicenter appears to have been that part of the metropolis which constitutes the Inns Quay ward and the parish of St. Mickens, covering a surface of 41 acres, 2 roods and 1 square pole or perch. All the lordly residences in the vicinity of the Palace of Justice were demolished, and that noble edifice itself, in which at the time of the catastrophe important legal debates were in progress, is literally a mass of ruins, beneath which it is to be feared all the occupants have been buried alive.
From the reports of eyewitnesses, it transpires that the seismic waves were accompanied by a violent atmospheric perturbation of cyclonic character. An article of headgear, since ascertained to belong to the much-respected Clerk of the Crown and Peace, Mr. George Fottrell, and a silk umbrella with gold handle with the engraved initials, crest, coat of arms, and house number of the erudite and worshipful chairman of Quarter Sessions, Sir Frederick Falconer, Recorder of Dublin, have been discovered by search parties in remote parts of the island, respectively. The former in the 3rd basaltic ridge of the Giant's Causeway, the latter embedded in the extent of 1 foot 3 inches in the sandy beach of Whole Open Bay near the old head of Kinsale.
Other eyewitnesses deposed that they observed an incandescent object of enormous proportions hurtling through the atmosphere at a terrifying velocity in a trajectory directed southwest by west. The work of salvage, removal of debris, human remains, etc., has been entrusted to Messrs. Michael Mead and Son, 159 Great Brunswick Street, and Messrs. T and C Martin, 77, 78, 79 and 80 North Wall, assisted by the men and officers of the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry under the general supervision of HRH Rear Admiral the Right Honourable Sir Hercules Hannibal Habeas Corpus Anderson.
And the last we saw was the bloody car rounding the corner and old Sheep's face on it gesticulating, and the bloody mongrel after it with his lugs back for all he was bloody well what to tear him from limb to limb. 100 to 5! Jesus, he took the value of it out of him, I promise you.
When lo, there came about them all a great brightness, and they beheld the chariot wherein he stood ascend to heaven. And they beheld him in the chariot, clothed upon in the glory of brightness, having raiment as of the sun, fair as the moon and terrible, that for awe they durst not look upon him. And there came a voice out of heaven, calling,
Elijah! Elijah!
And he answered with a main cry,
Abba! Adonai!
And they beheld him, even him, Ben Bloom Elijah, amid clouds of angels ascend to the glory of the brightness at an angle of 45 degrees over Donahue's in Little Green Street, like a shot off a shovel.
It's no use to ask me why, Dolly Gray. There's a murmur in the air, you can hear it everywhere. It is time to do and dare, Dolly Gray. Don't you hear the tramp of feet, Dolly Gray, sounding through the village street, Dolly Gray? 'Tis the tramp of soldiers true in their uniforms of blue. I must say goodbye to you, Dolly Gray. Goodbye, Dolly, I must leave you, though it breaks my heart to go. Something tells me I am needed at the front to fight the foe. See, the boys in blue are marching, and I can no longer stand. Hark, I hear the bugle calling, goodbye, Dolly Gray. Hear the rolling of the drums, Dolly Gray. Back from war the regiment comes, Dolly Gray. On your lovely face so fair I can see a look of care, for your soldier boy's not there, Dolly Gray. For the one you love so well, Dolly Gray, in the midst of battle fell, Dolly Gray. With his face towards to the foe, as he died he murmured low, I must say goodbye and go, Dolly Gray. Goodbye, Dolly, I must leave you, though it breaks my heart to go. Something tells me I am needed at the front to fight the foe. See, the boys in blue are marching, and I can no longer stand. Hark, I hear the bugle calling, goodbye, Dolly Gray.
It's 2 a.m. after a late night during which Bloom acts as Stephen's protector. Bloom invites Stephen to his house for hot cocoa and conversation. The Ithaca chapter is written in question and answer format. The tone of both the questions and the answers is sober, formal, neutral, scientific, and detail-oriented. But you may notice some playfulness in the language toward the end of the chapter when Bloom is on the verge of sleep. Many details are disclosed in this chapter. For example, we learn that the Bloom's son, Rudy, lived for only 11 days, and that the Blooms have not had intercourse since just before Rudy's birth, 10 years ago. A long list of Molly's lovers is given, but most Joyce scholars believe they are all in Bloom's imagination. Finally, look for a clue as to how Bloom and Molly are positioned in bed.
What spectacle confronted them when they, first the host, then the guest, emerged silently, doubly dark, from obscurity by a passage from the rear of the house into the penumbra of the garden?
The heaven tree of stars hung with humid night blue fruit.
With what meditations did Bloom accompany his demonstration to his companion of various constellations?
Meditations of evolution increasingly vaster, of the moon invisible in incipient lunation, approaching perigee, of the infinite litigious scintillating uncondensed Milky Way, discernible by daylight by an observer placed at the lower end of a cylindrical vertical shaft 5,000 feet deep, sunk from the surface towards the center of the Earth, of Sirius, Alpha in Canis Major, 10 light years, 57 trillion miles, distant, and in volume 900 times the dimension of our planet, of Arcturus, of the precession of equinoxes.
Of Orion with belt and sextuple, sun, theta, and nebula, in which 100 of our solar systems could be contained. Of moribund and nascent new stars such as Nova in 1901. Of our system plunging towards the constellation of Hercules. Of parallelics and parallatic drift of so-called fixed stars. In reality, ever-moving wanderers from immeasurable remote aeons to infinitely remote futures, in comparison with which the years, 70, of allotted human life formed a parenthesis of infinitesimal brevity.
Were there obverse meditations of involution increasingly less vast?
Of the eons of geological periods recorded in the stratifications of the earth, of the myriad minute entomological organic existences concealed in cavities of the earth beneath removable stones and hives and mounds of microbes, germs, bacteria, bacilli, spermatozoa, of the incalculable trillions of billions of millions of imperceptible molecules contained by cohesion of molecular affinity in a single pinhead.
Of the universe of human serum constellated with red and white bodies, themselves universes of void space constellated with other bodies, each in continuity, its universe of divisible component bodies, of which each was again divisible in divisions of redivisible component bodies, dividends and divisors ever diminishing without actual division, till, if the progress were carried far enough, naught nowhere was never reached.
Why did he not elaborate these calculations to a more precise result?
Because some years previously, in 1886, when occupied with the problem of the quadrature of the circle, he learned of the existence of a number computed to a relative degree of accuracy to be of such magnitude and of so many places, for example, the 9th power of the 9th power of 9, that the result having been obtained, 33 closely printed volumes of 1,000 pages each of innumerable quires and reams of Indian paper would have to be requisitioned in order to contain the complete tale of its printed integers of units, tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of thousands, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions, the nucleus of a nebula, of every digit of every series containing succinctly the potentiality of being raised to the utmost kinetic elaboration of any power of any of its powers.
Well, what special affinities appeared to him to exist between the moon and women?
Her antiquity in preceding and surviving successive Tellurian generations, her nocturnal predominance, her satellitic dependence, her luminary reflection, her constancy under all her phases, rising and setting by her at appointed times, waxing and waning, the forced invariability of her aspect, her indeterminate response to inaffirmative interrogation, her potency over effluent and refluent waters, her power to enamor, to martify, to invest with beauty, to render insane, to incite to and aid delinquency.
The tranquil inscrutability of her visage, the terribility of her isolated, dominant, implacable, resplendent propinquity, her omens of tempest and of calm, the stimulation of her light, her motion, and her presence, the admonition of her craters, her arid seas, her silence, her splendor when visible, her attraction when invisible.
Were they indefinitely inactive?
At Stephen's suggestion, at Bloom's instigation, both first Stephen, then Bloom in penumbra urinated. Their sides contiguous, their organs of micturation reciprocally rendered invisible by manual circumposition. Their gazes, first Bloom's, then Stephen's, elevated to the projected luminous and semi-luminous shadow.
Similarly,
The trajectories of their first sequent, then simultaneous urinations were dissimilar. Bloom's longer, less irruent in the incomplete form of the bifurcated penultimate alphabetical letter, who in his ultimate year at high school, 1880, had been capable of attaining the point of greatest altitude against the whole concurrent strength of the institution. 210 scholars, Stephen's higher, more sibilant, who in the ultimate hours of the previous day had augmented by diuretic consumption and insistent vesical pressure.
What different problems presented themselves to each concerning the invisible, audible, collateral organ of the other?
To Bloom, the problems of irritability, tumescence, rigidity, reactivity, dimension, sanitariness, pilosity. To Stephen, the problem of the sacerdotal integrity of Jesus circumcised. 1 January, holiday of obligation to hear Mass and abstain from unnecessary servile work. And the problem as to whether the divine prepuce, the carnal bridal ring of the Holy Roman Catholic Apostolic Church, conserved in Calcutta, were deserving of simple hyperduli or of the 4th degree of latria, accorded to the abscission of such divine excrescences as hair and toenails.
How did they take their leave, one of the other, in separation?
Standing perpendicular at the same door and on different sides of its base, the lines of their valedictory arms meeting at any point and forming any angle less than the sum of 2 right angles.
Alone, what did Bloom feel?
The cold of interstellar space. Thousands of degrees below freezing point over the absolute zero of Fahrenheit, centigrade, or Romer. The incipient intimations of proximate dawn.
Did he remain?
With deep inspiration, he returned, retraversing the garden, re-entering the passage, reclosing the door. With brief suspiration, he reassumed the candle, reascended the stairs, reapproached the door of the front room, hall floor, and re-entered.
What suddenly arrested his ingress?
The right temporal lobe of the hollow sphere of his cranium came into contact with a solid timber angle, where, an infinitesimal but sensible fraction of a second later, a painful sensation was located in consequence of antecedent sensations transmitted and registered.
Describe the alterations affected in the disposition of the articles of furniture.
A sofa upholstered in prune plush had been translocated from opposite the door to the ingle side near the compactly furled Union Jack. The blue and white checkered inlaid majolica-topped table had been placed opposite the door in the place vacated by the prune plush sofa. Thus, the walnut sideboard, a projecting angle of which had momentarily arrested his ingress, had been moved from its position beside the door to a more advantageous but more perilous position in front of the door. 2 chairs had been moved from right and left of the ingle side of to the position originally occupied by the blue and white checkered inlaid majolica-topped table.
What occupied the position originally occupied by the sideboard?
A vertical piano with exposed keyboard, its closed coffin supporting a pair of long yellow ladies' gloves and an emerald ashtray containing 4 consumed matches, a partly consumed cigarette, and 2 discolored ends of cigarettes. Its music crest supporting the music in the key of G, natural for voice and piano of Love's Old Sweet Song, words by G. Clifton Bingham, composed by J. L. Malloy, open at the last page with the final indications: ad libitum, forte, pedal, animato, sustained, pedal, ritirando, close.
What past consecutive causes, before rising pre-apprehended, of accumulated fatigue did Bloom, before rising, silently recapitulate?
The preparation of breakfast, burnt offering, intestinal congestion and premeditative defecation, holy of holies, the bath, rite of John, the funeral, rite of Samuel, the advertisement of Alexander Keys, Urim and Thummim, the unsubstantial lunch, rite of Melchizedek, the visit to museum and National Library, holy place, the book hunt along Bedford Row, Merchant's Arch, Wellington Quay, Simchat Torah, the music in the Armand Hotel, Shira Shiram, the altercation with the truculent troglodyte in Bernard Kiernan's premises, Holocaust, a blank period of time including a car drive, a visit to a house of mourning, a leave-taking, wilderness, the eroticism produced by feminine exhibitionism, rite of Onan, the prolonged delivery of Mrs. Mina Purefoy, heave offering, the visit to the disorderly house of Mrs. Bella Cohen, 82 Tyrone Street, lower and subsequent brawl, and chance medley in Beaver Street, Armageddon, nocturnal perambulation to and from cabin shelter, butt bridge, atonement.
What self-involved enigma did Bloom, risen, going, gathering multicolored, multiform, multitudinous garments, voluntarily apprehending, not comprehend?
Who was Macintosh?
What self-evident enigma pondered with desultory constancy during 30 years did Bloom now, having affected natural obscurity by the extinction of artificial light, silently, suddenly comprehend?
Where was Moses when the candle went out?
Bloom's Acts.
He deposited the articles of clothing on a chair, removed his remaining articles of clothing, took from beneath the bolster at the head of the bed a folded long white nightshirt, inserted his head and arms into the proper apertures of the nightshirt, removed a pillow from the head to the foot of the bed, prepared the bed linen accordingly, and entered the bed.
How?
With circumspection, as invariably when entering an abode, his own or not his own. With solicitude, the snake spiral springs of the mattress being old, the brass quoits and pendant viper radii loose and tremulous under stress and strain, prudently, as entering a lair or ambush of lust or adders. Lightly, the less to disturb. Reverently, the bed of conception and of birth, of consummation of marriage and of breach of marriage, of sleep and of death.
What did his limbs, when gradually extended, encounter?
New clean bed linen, additional odors, the presence of a human form, female, hers. The imprint of a human form, male, not his. Some crumbs, some flakes of potted meat, recooked, which she removed.
If he had smiled, why would he have smiled?
To reflect that each one who enters imagines himself to be the first to enter, whereas he is always the last term of a preceding series, even if the first term of a succeeding one. Each imagining himself to be the first, last, only, and alone, whereas he is neither first nor last, nor only, nor alone, in a series originating in and repeated to infinity.
What preceding series?
Assuming Mulvey to be the first term of his series, Penrose, Bartle Darcy, Professor Goodwin, Julius Mastiansky, John Henry Menton, Father Bernard Corrigan, a farmer at the Royal Dublin Society's Horse Show, Maggot O'Reilly, Matthew Dillon, Valentine Blake Dillon, Lord Mayor of Dublin, Christopher Callanan, Lenehan, an Italian organ grinder, an unknown gentleman in the Gaiety Theatre, Benjamin Dollard, Simon Dedalus, Andrew Pisser Burke, Joseph Cuff, Wisdom Healy, Alderman John Hooper, Dr. Francis Brady, Father Sebastian of Mount Argus, a boot black at the General Post Office, Hugh E. Blazes Boylan, and so each and so on to no last term.
What were his reflections concerning the last member of this series, late occupant of the bed?
Reflections on his vigour, a bounder. Corporal proportion, a bill sticker. Commercial ability, a bester. Impressionability, a boaster.
Why, for the observer, impressionability in addition to vigor, corporal proportion, and commercial ability?
Because he had observed with augmenting frequency in the preceding members of the same series the same concupiscence, inflammably transmitted, first with alarm, then with understanding, then with desire, finally with fatigue, with alternating symptoms of epicene comprehension and apprehension.
In what final satisfaction did these antagonistic sentiments and reflections, reduced to their simplest forms, converge?
Satisfaction at the ubiquity in eastern and western terrestrial hemispheres, in all habitable lands and islands explored or unexplored, the land of the midnight sun, the islands of the blessed, the Isles of Greece, the land of promise, of adipose anterior and posterior female hemispheres, redolent of milk and honey, and of excretory sanguine and seminal warmth, reminiscent of secular families of curves of amplitude, insusceptible of moods of impression or of contrarieties of expression, expressive of mute, immutable, mature animality.
The visible signs of anti-satisfaction?
An approximate erection, a solicitous aversion, a gradual elevation, a tentative revelation, a silent contemplation.
Then
He kissed the plump, mellow yellow, smellow melons of her rump. On each plump, melanous hemisphere in their mellow yellow furrow, with obscure, prolonged, provocative, melon-smelling us,
The visible signs of post-satisfaction.
A silent contemplation, a tentative elation, a gradual abasement, a solicitous aversion, a proximate erection.
What followed this silent action?
Somnolent invocation, less somnolent recognition, incipient excitation, catechetical interrogation.
With what modifications did the narrator apply to this interrogation?
Negative. He omitted to mention the clandestine correspondence between Martha Clifford and Henry Flower, the public altercation at, in, and in the vicinity of the licensed premises of Barney Kiernan and Company Limited, the erotic provocation and response thereto caused by the exhibitionism of Gertrude, Gertie, surname unknown.
Positive. He included mention of a performance by Mrs. Banman Palmer of Lee at the Gaiety Theatre, an invitation to supper at Wynn's Murphy's Hotel, a volume of pecaminos pornographical tendency, Entitudes, Sweets of Sin, anonymous author, a gentleman of fashion.
Was the narration otherwise unaltered by modifications?
Absolutely.
What limitations of activity and inhibitions of conjugal rights were perceived by listener and narrator concerning themselves during the course of this intermittent and increasingly more laconic narration?
By the listener, a limitation of fertility, inasmuch as complete carnal intercourse with ejaculations of semen within the natural female organ, having last taken place 5 weeks previous to the birth on 29th of December 1893 of second and only male issue, deceased 9 January 1894, aged 11 days, there remained a period of 10 years, 5 months, and 18 days during which carnal intercourse had been incomplete, without ejaculation of semen within the natural female organ.
By the narrator, a limitation of activity, mental and corporal, inasmuch as complete mental intercourse between himself and the listener had not taken place since the consummation of puberty, indicated by catamenic hemorrhage of the female issue of narrator and listener. 15 September 1903. There remained a period of 9 months and 1 day, during which, in consequence of a pre-established natural comprehension in incomprehension between the consummated females, listener and issue, complete corporal liberty of action had been circumscribed.
In what direction did listener and narrator lie?
Listener southeast by east. Narrator northwest by west, on the 53rd parallel of latitude north and 6th meridian of longitude west, at an angle of 45 degrees to the terrestrial equator.
In what state of rest or motion?
At rest, relatively to themselves and to each other. In motion, being each and both carried westward, forward, and rearward respectively, by the proper perpetual motion of the earth through ever-changing tracts of never-changing space.
Womb, weary.
He rests. He has travelled.
With?
Sinbad the sailor, and Tinbad the tailor, and Jinbad the jailer, and Winbad the whaler, and Ninbad the nailer, and Finbad the failure, and Binbad the baler, and Pinbad the paler, and Minbad the mailer, and Hinbad the hailer, and Rinbad the railer, and Dinbad the caler, and Vinbad the quailer, and Linbad the yailer, and Sinbad the fatrailer.
When?
Going to dark bed, there was a square round Sinbad the sailor, rocks, ox, egg in the night of the bed of all the ox of the rocks of Darkenbad the bright daler.
Where?
hill and dale, the moonbeams fall and spread their silver light o'er all.
But those bright eyes,
But those bright eyes, I soon shall see, reserve their light for me. Methinks they now invite. I come, my heart's delight. I come, my heart's delight.
I come, my heart's delight. My heart's delight. I come, my heart's delight.
I come, my heart's delight. I come, my heart's delight. My heart's delight.
Before the finale, I want to thank all of the performers for their excellent work tonight. Jane Bacon, James Gallo, James Lancaster, Bairbre Dowling, Johnny O'Callahan, John Lee, Robert MacNeil, Daniel Armstrong, and Douglas Sumi. Okay, just a couple more minutes. After Molly Bloom has her say, we will all sing together in traditional Joyce fashion. Then you're invited to gather in the courtyard for some more music, Joycean food, and Guinness, and a chance to talk to the performers. And now, the last word belongs to Molly Bloom. This, of course, is an excerpt from the 24,000-word chapter with no punctuation that starts with yes and ends with yes.
Yes. I wonder, was he satisfied with me? One thing I didn't like, his slapping me behind going away so familiarly in the hall, though I laughed. I'm not a horse. Or an ass, am I? I suppose he was thinking of his father. I wonder, is he awake, thinking of me? Or dreaming? Am I in it? Who gave him that flower that he brought? He smelt of some kind of drink, not whiskey or stout. When I lit the lamp, because he must have come 3 or 4 times, with that tremendous big red brute of a thing he has. I thought the vein, or whatever the dickens they call it, was going to burst, though his nose is not so big. After I took off all my things with the blinds down, after me hours of dressing and perfuming and combing it, like iron or some kind of a thick crowbar standing all the time. He must have eaten oysters, I think. A few dozen. He was in great singing voice. No, I never in all my life felt anyone had one the size of that. To make you feel full up. He must have eaten a whole sheep after. What's the idea making us like that with a big hole in the middle of us? Or like a stallion driving it up into you. Because that's all they want out of you. With that determined, vicious look in his eye, I had to half shut my eyes. Still, he hasn't such a tremendous amount of spunk in him. when I made him pull out and do it on me, considering how big he is. So much the better in case any of it wasn't washed out properly. The last time I let him finish it in me. Nice invention they made for women. For him to get all the pleasure. I suppose he was meeting Josie Powell and the funeral and thinking about me and Boylan set him off. Well, he can think what he likes now. That'll do him any good. She used to always be embracing me, Josie, whenever he was there. Meaning him, of course. You're always in great humour, she said. Yeah, because it grigged her, because she knew what it meant, because I used to tell her a good bit of what went on between us. Not all, but just enough to make her mouth water. But that wasn't my fault. She didn't darken the door much after we were married. I wonder what she's got like now, after living with that dotty husband of hers she had, her face beginning to look drawn and run down the last time I saw her. She must have been just after a row at him, because I saw on the moment she was edging to draw down a conversation about husbands and talk about him to run him down. Oh, what was it she told me? Oh, yes! That sometimes he used to go to bed with his muddy boots on. When the maggot takes him. Just imagine having to get into bed with a thing like that. That might murder you any moment. What a man. Well, it's not the one way with everyone goes mad. Poldy anyhow, whatever he does, always wipes his feet on the mat when he comes in. Wet or shine, and always blackens his own boots too. And he always takes off his hat when he comes up the street like then. And now he's going about in his slippers to look for £1,000 for a postcard UP up. Oh, sweetheart May, wouldn't a thing like that simply bore you stiff to extinction? Actually, too stupid even to take his boots off. Now, what could you make of a man like that? Oh, I'd rather die 20 times over than marry another of their sex. Yes, I think I made them a bit firmer, sucking them like that. So long he made me thirsty. Titties, he calls them. Had to laugh. Yeah, this one anyhow. Stiff the nipple gets for the least thing. I'll get him to keep that up. And I'll take those eggs beaten up with marsala, fatten them out for him. Oh, what are all those veins and things? Curious the way it's made. Two the same, in case of twins. They're supposed to represent beauty placed up there like those statues in the museum. One of them pretending to hide it with their hand. Aren't they so beautiful? Of course, compared with what the man looks like, with his 2 bags full and his other thing hanging down out of him. Or sticking up at you like a hat rack. No wonder they hide it with a cabbage leaf. I've me mother's eyes and figure anyhow. Let them get a husband first that's fit to be looked at, and a daughter like mine. Or see if they can excite a swell with money that can pick and choose whatever he wants, like Boylan, to do it 4 or 5 times locked in each other's arms. Oh, the voice either. Oh, I could have been a prima donna, only I married him. I suppose there isn't in all creation another man with the habits he has. Look at the way he's sleeping at the foot of the bed. How can he be without a hard bolster? It's well he doesn't kick, or he might have knocked out all me teeth. Breathing with his hand on his nose. Oh, I know what I'll do. I'll start dressing myself to go out. I'll put on me best shift and drawers. Let him have a good eyeful out of that, to make his Mickey stand for him. I'll let him know, if that's what he wanted, that his wife, is fucked, damn well fucked too, up to me neck nearly, not by him, 5 or 6 times hand running. There's the mark of his spunk on the clean sheets. Oh, I wouldn't bother even to iron it out. That ought to satisfy him. If you don't believe me, feel my belly. Unless I made him stand there and put him into me, I've a mind to tell him every scrap and make him do it out in front of me. Serve him right, it's all his own fault if I am an adulteress. Oh, I love flowers. I'd love to have the whole place swimming in roses. God of heaven, there's nothing like nature. The wild mountains and then the sea and the waves rushing. The sun shines for you, he said. The day we were lying among the rhododendrons on Howth Head, in the grey tweed suit and a straw hat, the day I got him to propose to me. Yes. First I gave him the bit of seed cake out of my mouth, and it was leap year like now. Yeah. 16 years ago. My God, after that long kiss I near lost my breath. Yes. He said I was a flower of the mountain. Yes. So we are flowers, all a woman's body. Yeah, that was the one true thing he said in his life. And the sun shines for you today. Yes. That was why I liked him, because I saw he understood or felt what a woman is. And I knew I could always get round him, and I gave him all the pleasure I could, leading him on till he asked me to say yes. And I wouldn't answer first, only looked out over the sea and the sky. I was thinking of so many things he didn't know of. The old castle, thousands of years old, yes. And those handsome Moors all in white and turban like kings, asking you to sit down in their little bit of a shop. And the sea crimson sometimes like fire, and the glorious sunsets, and the fig trees in the Alameda Gardens, yes, and the queer little streets, and the pink and the blue and the yellow houses, and the rose gardens, and the jessamine, and the geraniums, and cactuses, and Gibraltar as a girl where I was a flower of the mountain, yes, when I put the rose in my hair like the Andalusian girls use her. Shall I wear red? Yes. And how he kissed me under the Moorish wall, and I thought, well, as well him as another. And then I asked him, with my eyes to ask again. Yeah. And then he asked me, would I? Yes. To say yes. My mountain flower. And first I put my arms around him. Yes. I drew him down to me so I could feel my breasts all perfume. Yes. And his heart was going like mad. And I said, yes, I will. Yes.
In the dear dead days beyond recall, when on the world the mists began to fall, out of the dreams that rose in happy throng, lo, to our hearts love song, an old sweet song. And in the dusk where fell the firelight gleam, softly it wove itself into our dream. Just a song at twilight, where the lights are low, and the flickering shadows softly comes and goes. Though the heart will be sad day and long, still twas at twilight comes love's old song, comes love's old sweet song. Even today we hear love song
eternity dwells forevermore. Footsteps may falter, weary grow the way. Still we can hear it at the close of day. So till the end, when life's dim shadows fall, love will be found the sweetest song of all. Just a song at twilight, when the lights are low, and the flickering shadows softly come.